This is the President of the United States, Walter Reed, with the indignity of a mask on. Now, why do I say indignity of a mask? I say that because Trump chose to make the mask a political statement. And in making the mask a political statement, he has pushed off the notion of wearing one. By the same token, Trump was terrified of catching COVID-19 because he thought it would undermine his message that all of this is just a testing issue, not anything that's real going on. But reality asserted itself. Bolsonaro gets it. Bolsonaro, one of Trump's famous friendship henchmen, comes down with COVID-19. Bojo, one of Trump's good friends, comes down with COVID-19. And Trump, who fully understands that if he catches it, they are going to joke the shit out of him. Not to mention, he is going to look that much more like a clown for downplaying the severity of this issue. The reality is, when Trump goes from point A to point B, he has an advanced crew to make sure that that area is clean because he doesn't want to take the chance of getting it himself. Wearing the mask, at this point, he's been to some degree forced into that position, even though it should have been a position in and of itself that he should have taken handedly. Just because you want to try to reopen the economy doesn't necessarily mean that you take a position of being anti-mask. That's just somewhat bizarre. You can still push for the economy to be open. You can still be as unempathetic as you want to be. You can still walk around in a mask just for your own personal safety, considering you've acknowledged that COVID-19 is a thing, even if you want to say that thing is going down. Well, it's not going down. The death numbers are going up. The ICUs are filling up. You have Arizona asking for a refrigeration truck because they can't necessarily take on the number of deaths associated with the virus. And the President of the United States, walking in Walter Reed, has finally been cowed into a position where he's wearing a mask. Reality asserted itself. If the President takes this many precautions to ensure that he doesn't come down with COVID-19, if he gets and makes sure the facilities are clean, making sure that the temperatures are checked, and whether or not he's social distancing with the people around him, he's making sure that the people around him don't necessarily have COVID-19. Can the same be true for jails? Interesting, right? The answer, logically, of course, is no. If we're right about COVID-19, that people in close quarters have a tendency to spread the disease because, well, for obvious reasons, the virus can jump from person to person, especially and in more so when the quarters are close, then prisons are the ultimate close quarters. Ultimate in a way where the prisoners have no capacity to basically control their living space. Prisoners are 550% more likely to get COVID-19, 300% more likely to die. New study shows. But again, that's logical, right? Especially if we're thinking of the way the virus spreads. What about people who are being deported by ICE? For a period of time, those people often are prisoners. Those people are shuffled from pillar to post and before they get evicted from the country. Would they be more or less likely to be an area to which those viruses are spread? And is ICE taking due diligence to ensure that's not being a slush COVID area to be spread around the world? I think you know the answer to that already. The answer is no. ICE is not taking due diligence to ensure that the virus is not spreading. And ICE is becoming, or has been, a super spreader of this virus around the world. For all the talk of the Chinese spreading it to America, what about America spreading it around the globe? Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. When COVID-19 hit, ICE didn't cease its functions. ICE, whatever the modifications they made to the functions, was still going to go about doing what they consider to be their job. The idea that any particular system will deal with the higher order of the system to ensure that what they're doing is not necessarily disadvantageous doesn't seem to apply here. Also, from the top, you don't have Trump or an administration that's sane and rational from the perspective of human life to ensure that that organization doesn't do exactly what that organization is currently doing, which is basically being a super spreader of the virus. Right here. This is a New York Times piece. Take a listen to this clip. You're going to hear people from the various camps talk about their experiences while in those camps. And the thing is, at the point where you're captured and you're locked into some kind of facility, you don't have control over the various people who are in there with you. And if those people have a virus, it's very possible, and in this case, likely, as evidenced by what has been taking place, that the perspective of ICE has been to continue to do their job, and that any kind of modicum of precaution is done almost as a happenstance, not necessarily as a thing unto itself. The larger role and the larger job of ICE just maintains kicking people out of the country, or for that matter, imprisonment. Take a listen to the inmates who are stuck in these detention centers with people who are ill and with ICE not caring.
Allí sí, pasé 2 días con una fiebre.
Centro de salud directamente me mandaron al hospital.
Con su penal.
ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਕੁਝ ਲੋਕ ਜਿਨੇ ਵੀ ਸੈਂਟਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੀਗੇ ਪਰ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਵਾਇਰਸ ਪੋਜ਼ਿਟਿਵ ਹੋਣ ਕੁਝ ਲੋਕ.
These 4 immigrants have something in common. They were recently deported from the United States, and they all had the coronavirus. The New York Times, in collaboration with the Marshall Project, has interviewed sick detainees in ICE detention centers over the last 4 months. We've tracked hundreds of domestic and international deportation flights. We've spoken with airline staff who operate those flights. And we've talked to COVID-positive deportees in Guatemala, El Salvador, India, and Haiti. ICE says it has followed CDC guidelines, but our investigation reveals how unsafe conditions and scattershot testing turned ICE into a domestic and global spreader of the coronavirus.
Now, they found thousands of people that were basically ill, or ICE themselves identified thousands. I think it was 3,000. But the thing is, how many ever people ICE is identifying, that number has to be that much more high, or that much higher, because they weren't necessarily testing everybody. It was somewhat happenstance testing or low-level testing. And even on the low level of testing, you have 3,000 people who they found to be infected. We spoke to more than 30, this is New York Times, 30 immigrant detainees who described cramped and unsanitary detention centers where social distancing was nearly impossible and protective gear almost non-existent. It was like a time bomb, says Udens, a Cuban immigrant held in Louisiana. At least 4 deportees interviewed by the Times from India, Haiti, Guatemala, and El Salvador tested positive for the virus just days after arriving from the United States. ICE has confirmed over 3,000 coronavirus positive detainees in detention centers, though testing was limited. We tracked 750 domestic ICE flights since March, carrying thousands of detainees to different centers around the world. Some said were sick. Kante, a refugee from Kyrgyzstan, said he moved from the Pike County Correction Facility in Pennsylvania to Prairie Land Detention Center in Texas despite showing COVID-19 symptoms. He was confirmed to have the virus just a few days later. I was panicking, he said. I didn't want to die here in this prison. The government of the 11 countries have confirmed deportees returned home with COVID-19, meaning 11 countries that people have been deported to. Those countries have confirmed that the U.S. has basically been dropping people off with the virus. When asked about the agency's role in spreading the virus by moving the deportees who are sick, ICE said that it took precautions and followed guidelines of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. As of last week, ICE said that they was still able to test only a sampling of immigrants before sending them home, yet deportation flights continue. They've been kicking people out of the country, sending them around the world ill. And in sending people around the world ill, they've been putting ill people in with sick people and basically having those people together for a period of time, ensuring that some probability of those people who are detained with them are going to get ill just by being in detention. This is what our agency is doing. This is what our agency is doing. Like, this is appalling, to put it mildly. We are. Look, ICE has gotten to the point when your government captures somebody, just like they were capturing somebody if they were, let's say, being arrested. All of us, our taxes, pay for those cops. All of us in our society basically cede some level of power and authority, especially from the standpoint of individual will, meaning you can't do any and everything that you want, especially if it trespasses on somebody else's individual liberties, even though those things do take place. But all things being equal, we try to have some idea of that. Part of that is the idea that life has some level of value. And if cops are engaging somebody, cops are engaging them not necessarily with the impetus to kill. In fact, the impetus to kill should be the last rational act that a cop can go to. And that cop should be held responsible if that cop is taking that action of maximum justice when there are other rational acts that can take place without necessarily killing and extinguishing that life. The same thing is true for ICE. We're not hiring ICE agents to kill inmates. There's a certain level of assumed responsibility to ensure that you do and you have due diligence to get that person alive back from point A to point B when that person was captured. Meaning the moment that person is in your custody, you have a certain philosophical responsibility, ethically and morally, to not take actions that would injure the life and limb of that person. If you are not putting people, or if you're putting people in situations that can make them ill and sick, you're not living up to that ethical responsibility. And that is literally what ICE is doing. And are you even shocked by that? I mean, this is the organization that will go round up people, put them in detention centers, very few sanitary items, and then would try to explain how having very few sanitary items is still sanitary when they're talked about this or dealing with Congress. This organization is spreading this virus around the world. And the Trump administration doesn't care one iota. The federal government doesn't care one iota. And even putting the story out, I strongly suspect nothing will change in the way that they go about their operations. This is abominable, to put it mildly. I would say they should be ashamed of themselves, but I would imagine they don't have any notion of shame at all in this process. I'll end this here because there are other stories I want to get to. Like, share, and of course, subscribe.